lecture hall fell silent when Professor Andrew Carter smirked and said, "Solve this equation, and I'll marry you." He meant it as a joke, but the janitor standing near the back of the room slowly raised his hand. Everyone turned to look at him. His name was Daniel Reed. He wore a faded blue uniform, his hands rough from years of cleaning chalkboards and emptying trash bins. Students whispered, some laughed softly, and Professor Carter shook his head as if amused by the absurdity of the moment. No one in that room knew that in the next few minutes, their understanding of intelligence, dignity, and destiny would be shattered forever. Daniel had worked at St. Mark's University for 7 years. Every morning before sunrise, he arrived quietly, pushing his cleaning cart through long corridors filled with echoes of footsteps and ambition. Most people barely noticed him. To them, he was invisible, just another janitor who existed in the background of their busy academic lives. But Daniel noticed everything. He listened to lectures while wiping desks. He memorized formulas while mopping floors. He stood outside classrooms, pretending to adjust trash bins, while his mind followed complex mathematical theories that most students struggled to understand. At night, when the campus slept, Daniel sat alone in the library. He borrowed old textbooks that no one cared about anymore. He filled worn notebooks with equations, proofs, and ideas. His dream was simple but impossible. He wanted to study mathematics. But dreams cost money, and Daniel had none. His father had died when he was 13. His mother worked double shifts at a diner, barely earning enough to keep food on the table. Daniel dropped out of high school to support his family. University had always felt like a world he was never meant to enter. So he cleaned it instead. Professor Andrew Carter was famous at St. Mark's, brilliant, charismatic, and proud of his intellect. He was known for solving equations that others considered impossible. Students admired him, feared him, and competed fiercely to earn his praise. That morning he stood before the class, chalk in hand, eyes shining with excitement. "I have a challenge for you," he said, writing a massive equation across the board. Symbols, integrals, and variables filled the surface like a storm of logic. "This problem," he continued, "has challenged mathematicians for decades. If anyone in this room solves it today, I will personally propose marriage." The class erupted in laughter. It was obviously a joke. Students tried anyway. They scribbled frantically, argued in whispers, and erased mistakes again and again. Minutes passed. No one came close. Then Daniel raised his hand. At first, Professor Carter thought it was a student playing a prank. When he realized it was the janitor, his smile tightened. "Yes," he asked politely, but with a hint of sarcasm. "I think I can solve it," Daniel said softly. The room exploded in laughter. "Come on," someone whispered. "He's a janitor." Professor Carter hesitated. Part of him felt irritated, another part amused. Finally, he shrugged. "Very well," he said. "Come to the board." Daniel walked slowly toward the front. Every step felt heavy. His heart pounded, not because he feared the equation, but because he feared the people watching him. He picked up the chalk. For a moment, he stood still. Then he began to write. At first, students stopped laughing. Then they leaned forward. Daniel's hand moved with calm precision. He didn't hesitate. He didn't erase. He transformed the chaotic equation into a clear structure, step by step. His logic was elegant, his reasoning flawless. Professor Carter's smile faded. Minutes passed in complete silence. When Daniel reached the final line, he wrote the answer neatly and placed the chalk down. He turned around. "I think this is the solution," he said quietly. The room was frozen. Professor Carter walked slowly to the board. He stared at the solution, reading each step carefully. His eyes widened. His hands trembled slightly. It was correct. Not just correct, brilliant. He felt something he had never felt before in his life, shock, and shame. After the class ended, students surrounded Daniel, asking questions, praising him, trying to understand how a janitor could solve a problem their professor had declared nearly impossible. Daniel smiled politely, but he felt overwhelmed. Professor Carter approached him later that day. "Daniel," he said softly, "can we talk?" They sat in an empty classroom. "Where did you learn mathematics like this?" the professor asked. Daniel looked down at his hands. "I learned by listening," he replied, "by reading old books, by practicing at night." Professor Carter felt a tightness in his chest. "Why didn't you enroll in the university?" he asked. Daniel hesitated. "I couldn't afford it," he said simply. That single sentence hit harder than any equation. From that day on, Daniel's life began to change, but not easily. Some students respected him, others mocked him. "He got lucky," they said. "He memorized something," they whispered. "He doesn't belong here." Daniel felt the weight of their words every day. He applied for a scholarship, but the process was brutal. Forms, interviews, doubts, and rejection letters tested his patience and courage. There were moments when he wanted to give up and return to the quiet safety of invisibility. But Professor Carter refused to let him disappear again. He helped Daniel prepare for entrance exams. He stayed late after classes, guiding him through advanced mathematics. Slowly, the arrogant professor became a mentor, and then a friend. Yet Daniel faced another challenge: his family. His mother feared losing him to a world she didn't understand. "People like us don't belong there," she said one night. "Dreams are dangerous, Daniel." Daniel held her hands gently. "Maybe," he said, "but living without dreams is worse." Months later, the university announced scholarship results. Daniel stood outside the administration building, his heart racing. Professor Carter stood beside him. When the list was posted, Daniel searched for his name. For a few seconds, he couldn't find it. Then he saw it. Daniel Reed, full academic scholarship. Tears filled his eyes. Professor Carter smiled, not with pride in himself, but with pride in Daniel. "You solved more than an equation," he said quietly. "You solved your destiny." Years passed. Daniel was no longer a janitor. He became one of the brightest students in the university. He published research papers, won competitions, and inspired others who felt invisible and underestimated. On the day of his graduation, he stood on the same stage where he once cleaned floors. Professor Carter watched from the audience. When Daniel finished his speech, he said something that no one in the hall would ever forget. "People laughed when I raised my hand," he said. "But sometimes the world laughs because it doesn't know who you really are yet. Never let anyone decide your worth based on your title, your clothes, or your past. Your mind, your courage, and your faith in yourself are far more powerful than any label." The audience stood and applauded. Professor Carter felt tears in his eyes. He remembered his careless joke, and how it had revealed a genius hidden in silence. That day, Daniel walked past the university halls once more. But this time, he wasn't invisible. He was proof that greatness can rise from the most unexpected places. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the world, another unnoticed dreamer listened, learned, and waited for the moment when someone would finally say, "Come to the board."